So, Brother Adam.
Good morning. It's always nice to be here on a very nice and bright Sunday morning. And when you think about, everything that it took to get here, you think about what are the absolute necessities, the preciseness of the world, the complexities that needed to occur for all of us to be in this room together. There's just so much that had to have happened just right, and every one of our decisions that we've all made, it's all led up to this point of us being in this room right now or watching online due to COVID. You think about creation in itself and how complex it is and everything that's happened. And you think about on the bigs, like on the grand scheme, think about the earth, like from a science term, the earth it's at a 23.5 degrees tilt. And it's that precise degree, that precise measurement that enables us to have all four seasons, to not be too hot, too cold. And the earth itself, it's 93 million miles away from the sun. And it's that exact distance which makes it so that we don't freeze up, we don't burn up. It's that precise, that complex. The earth itself, it's moving 66,000 miles per hour around the sun in its orbit. And so we can get day and night, but it's moving that fast. And all of us, it feels like we're motionless. That we're all just sitting down. Or I guess I'm standing up, but everyone else is just sitting down. And not feel like you're moving 66,000 miles per hour through the universe. And then from the grand scheme, you think about the small things. So kind of a science question. For atoms, not me, but atoms, atoms. How many atoms do you think there are in the human body on average? Anyone? No, not even close. Anyone else? No. So the number, it is 7 octillion. And for those of you that don't know octillion, or for reference, so a million has 6 zeros after it. An octillion has 27 zeros after it. So yeah, that's a lot of atoms within just one human body. So like a trillion, it's a high number, one number that most of us are familiar with after billion. But there's still 27 zeros of just atoms, different molecules, living organisms within ourselves. And not just that, but every single second, the human body produces, on average, about 25 million new cells every single second. Think about how quickly cells are able to survive and then die. But there's 25 million new cells in a 7 octillion atoms in the body. And something which I've always found kind of neat and interesting, showing complexity, again, in all the intricacies from the large to the small, is in the small intestine. The length of the small intestine, it's small, you would think, but the length it's about 22-23 feet long. And that's like the silver lining inside your gut. So you've got something that is about close to 4 times as long as the average human body. And you have that just piled up inside your stomach. And another thing I found cool is small intestine, 23 feet long. So you think large intestine is also pretty big? That's only about 5 feet. So for some reason, the small intestine is actually bigger than the large intestine. Go figure it with that. But again, it just shows how complex things can be. And when things get complex, we may not necessarily know the next step that we need to take. So what we need to do is move from that complex side or to a simple side to order. And one way of looking at that is through patterns. Is having patterns leading to predictable results. Like if I am cooking off of a recipe, there are certain steps that I need to take in order to come up with a final food. You have to, like if I'm making pancakes, you need to pour the batter in, you need to add chocolate chips, of course. Then you need to turn on the stove top, you need to put the batter into the pan, flip the pancake over and then serve it, put maple syrup on it, put whatever else. But there are certain steps that you need to take that lead to that end result. In psychology, there's a psychologist called Ivan Pavlov, and he had a experiment with behavioral conditioning with dogs, where every time that he rang a bell, he would feed dogs food. And he kept doing that enough times where it became synonymous with as soon as he hit the bell, the dogs, their mouths were salivating because they were anticipating food. So it's that conditioning from point A going to point B, leading directly to it. Because that's the type of order that we need to look at things. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 33, I'll just read it because it's a little short. It says, "For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace." So that was 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33. So our God, he doesn't want things to be too confusing for us. He wants it to be peaceful. And in this mindset, peaceful relating to simple, and simple in this aspect, I want to refer to it as being something that's easy, something that's straightforward, something that's manageable for us, effortless, uncomplicated, something smooth. And so when God is saying, or when Paul is saying that God is not a God of confusion, but of these things, he's uncomplicated, straightforward, he's not confusing, he's understandable for us. We're able to understand what he wants. It's written down in this book. And because of that, we're able to have a peace of mind. Because despite all of the intricacies, all the complexities of this world, our path, ourselves, it's simple, it's straightforward. And so, for those of you that may know me, I like to have a saying. And there's a couple different caveats to this saying. But in essence, it's, in life, when making a choice, it's a 50-50 shot. You have 50-50 opportunity for no matter what decision it's going to be. Right now, there's a 50-50 shot that the president walks in through that door. He either does or he doesn't. All else variables being null. And it is very important to put that disclaimer there. All other variables being null, but there's a 50-50 shot that anything's likely to happen. And it's maybe an optimistic way of looking at life, or a simple perspective of looking through that way. But I like to do that, especially for something which, maybe without that stat would have been maybe president walking through the door, maybe 0.0001%. But I don't like that stat. That's way too low. So we'll say 50-50. But if it's something that, I want to happen, or more likely, like having my parents feed me on a Tuesday, which they typically do, instead of 50-50, because I want that to happen, I'll put it at like 95%. So, you got to play around with the statistics a little bit. But the essence is still the same. 50-50 things chance with all other variables being null. And again, it's just this simple perspective. With how complex things are out there, just take two outcomes. It either happens or it won't. And looking at, this simple perspective, we think about simple pleasures that we have in our own lives. Things that can bring us joy. Maybe something like when you're listening to the radio and you have a certain song pop in your head. Next second, that song pops up on the radio. It's a simple pleasure. It doesn't really mean too much, but it's enjoyable. If you're hungry and someone happens to just walk by and gives you a piece of chocolate, it's a simple pleasure. It's something that you weren't expecting, but it brings you joy. On a hot day, something like today, when you're walking around, don't have any water, don't really see no water in sight, there's a nice cool breeze that comes by. Again, simple pleasure, something that doesn't mean too much, kind of satisfies for one moment, but it's the simplicity that is able to bring us joy. Again, kind of taking a step back from all the scariness of this world, the uncertainty. Because as our brother read from this morning in Matthew 6, the do not worry, is something which I think is important to try to do at least, is we don't need to worry about tomorrow. In Matthew 6:34, tomorrow will worry about itself. We don't need to do any extra worrying about it. Life's going to worry itself. Life's going to happen whether or not we worry about it or not. So we may as well try to live our lives. And there's a lot of things in life which we often get caught up with and being too, worried about. Some small things which maybe these small things that we should try to focus less on worrying about, but more focus on just getting to, again, looking at it from a big point of mind, very broad perspective, taking a step back. Think about the clothes that you're wearing. Some people it takes them an hour to get dressed in the morning. And, probably not you, Dad. I think that you're like me. You wake up, you put on clothes. But some people, they worry about what clothes to wear and how it's going to affect their appearance, what other people are going to think about that. For sports, there's a lot of sports going on, and especially as us, none of us are extreme athletes in this room, that we don't play professional sports to get paid, but we often like to worry about the outcome. The NBA finals are on, they'll actually be on tonight, and you start to worry about who's going to win. But I would beg to differ with that one. But again, see, that's the type of worrying where, it's all in good fun, but if we worry too much about it, then it can start to consume us, lead us towards a bad part. Worrying about something like music. When I'm playing the piano in church, oftentimes I'll make a mistake. If I worry too much about that, I'll let that distract me and throw everyone else off. But sometimes you just need to push through that and kind of forget about that worry for a little bit. These small things that can often lead to derailing us from our path. So it's these small things that we shouldn't worry about, but we still do need to focus on the big things. I think that probably the two most important things in our life that we need to focus on is our family and God and His mission for us, and putting those first before everything else. And then comes the other important things, where you think about like our health, being physically healthy, mentally healthy, our school, if you're younger for going to school, if you're older going to work. It's important to not necessarily worry about it, but to stay focused, to really do that to the best of your ability in order to provide for your family. And then something which is like another psychological, I think that's the right term, but it's in psychology, it's Maslow has a hierarchy of needs. And what that is there are 5 steps of which everyone needs to really be able to accomplish in order to achieve the highest purpose. And having that high purpose, that's the highest step, self-actualization, in order to realizing who you truly are, to finding some purpose in your life. I think that's a very important thing. The other steps are like physiological needs. That's food, water, shelter. Then you have a sense of belonging, family, physical health. But that final step of self-actualization, realizing our purpose, that's very important for us to focus on, put as our highest priority. Because again, looking at things in simple terms. Let's say, so in simple terms, if we're going from point A to point B, the straightest or the quickest way to get from point A to point B, straight line. If I'm walking, let's say I'm right here, I want to go right there. right here, a couple steps, I've already made it to my destination. But let's say, something else happens. If I happen to take a little bit of a curve this way, then it's not so straight. It's not so simple, not as straightforward. And it's when we start to wander away from the straight line is when we start to kind of lose our focus. When you think about ways that can distract us from walking from here to there, and thinking about here as point A as where we are today, thinking about point B, again in simple terms, to the kingdom. What are some derailments that can lead us from point A to point B to make us so that we're walking around while we're maybe dipping down, going up, but not taking us directly right here? Because we want to go, again, in simple terms, going from point A to point B in as quickest way as possible. I think that greed is something that is very effective in being able to turn us away from getting us to where we want to be. So I want to turn to 1 Timothy chapter 6. That's 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. If I can find this one. So again, 1 Timothy chapter 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. So, and that final verse, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. That's something very important. It's not just money is the root of all evil, but the love of money. The desire to gain more, the desire for greed. It's more love for ourselves, putting trust in ourselves over God. If you look back in verse 8, but if we have food and clothing, physiological needs, we'll be content with that. We don't need all the other necessary perks of human life. Sure, it can bring us joy, but if it starts to derail us, then we need to learn to kind of stay away from those types of things. Because the great gain that we have, that we need to get in this life, is recognizing that it's through God, that He's the one that gives us everything, that we are blessed to be with Him. And with that, we need to be happy with what we have and to stay away from that type of greed. But there is a different point, or there is a difference between being content with what we have and being stagnant and being too simple to refuse any type of learning. So I want to turn to Proverbs chapter 1, verses 22 through 25. So that's Proverbs 1, verses 22 through 25. How long will you who are simple love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? Repent at my rebuke, then I will pour out my thoughts to you. I will make known to you my teachings. But since you refuse to listen when I call, and no one pays attention when I stretch out my hand, since you disregard all my advice and do not accept my rebuke, I in turn will laugh when disaster strikes you. I will mock you when calamity overtakes you. Here, especially in verse 22, you think of simple in a different way. Earlier, I was trying to get to the point where simple is being straightforward, easy, uncomplicated. But here in Proverbs, authors use it simple as someone that has no desire to further oneself. As a simpleton, as is a more, let's say, less nice way to describe someone that really just knows the basics and that's it. No desire to further themselves. And it's this type of simpleton that we are told to not become. That even though we want to stay away from all that greed, we can't just be content with where we are on a spiritual level, with where we are learning. Because there's always more things for us to learn. And maybe going from point A to point B, if we're content with where we are, we're just going to stop. We're not going to further oneself. We're not going to make ourselves closer. We're not going to bring us in the wrong direction, but we're not bringing us any closer to that final destination, that kingdom. We need to have that desire to keep improving oneself. Maybe give us an accelerant instead of, taking slow steps. Maybe, start to run towards that direction where we want to be at. So then, if in Proverbs, that's how they're described simple. But we want simple to be, again, that straightforward, easy, effortless, uncomplicated, smooth. So what does that mean for us today? What are some ways for us to help get closer to our end goal? Say that one of the easiest things is showing up. In sales, 90% of a sale is just showing up and following up. Showing up to church, it's very easy to do. You just wake up, you go from point A, you're home, go to church, point B. It doesn't really get as much simpler than that. Again, in very basic terms, you don't necessarily have to listen too much to every single word in that, that the exhorter says. But if you're showing up and you have that commitment to showing up, and very simple for us to do in order to continue ourselves, to improve upon ourselves. If we're struggling with something, another very easy thing to do for us, saying a prayer when you need help. It's very easy to talk to God. All you have to do, and not even that, close your eyes and just start talking. Again, very easy thing for us to do. Again, if you're struggling, with something internally, another easy thing to do, at least on paper, it's reaching out to someone. I know, as someone that oftentimes does struggle with reaching out to people, I like to come up with a lot of different excuses, but in all essence, it's very easy to do. You just send a text message, send an email. You can call, although please no one call me. Calls do like to take a while, but text messages are very easy to do. Very simple. You just say, very easy. Hey, you good? That is very millennial talk, but maybe you can phrase it a little bit more eloquently. But it's, again, very easy to do in essence. But you just have to go out there and do it. Very simple. Another simple thing to do is to read the Bible. I believe everyone in this room, maybe other than Anakaya, all of us are literate. All of us know how to read. And, in whatever language, in English, Farsi, Swahili, tribal language, whatever, all of us are able to just read certain words. Again, very simple for us to do. It's action. It's simple action, but we need to take that commitment to actually push further with it. And then the last thing, which is probably the hardest thing to do, it's being able to trust in God over ourselves. It's, again, very easy in theory to trust in someone else, but it's very hard in application, because we are here right now and God is all around us, but we can't necessarily see him. It's very difficult to be able to trust someone that you can't see. But we need to be able to put aside that type of a worry, that doubt in our mind, and to just accept that he is our Savior and we can trust in him and he will save us. So I want to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 12 through 14. That's 2 Corinthians 1, verses 12 through 14. Now this is our boast. our conscience testifies that we have conducted ourselves in the world, and especially in our relations with you, with integrity and godly sincerity. We have done so, relying not on worldly wisdom, but on God's grace. For we do not write you anything you cannot read or understand. I hope that, as you have understood us in part, you will come to understand fully that you can boast of us, just as we will boast of you in the day of the Lord Jesus. So we act with simplicity, with straightforwardness and sincerity, again, not due to ourselves, not because we're trusting in ourselves, but we do it due to God's grace. Not on the world, but because God has given us this opportunity. It's not our own understanding and knowledge. Because this book, as it says, they don't write anything for us that we cannot read or understand. Some aspects may be a little complicated, a little confusing, that part. That's why you read over it. That's why you talk to other people so you're able to better understand it. Because there's nothing in here that's too complicated for us not to understand. Because if I'm at right here, point A, point B is the kingdom, in simple terms, how do I get as quickly as possible in a straight line without making any deterrences from point A to point B? How many wrong turns are we going to take? How many, out of the ways is going to be? Am I going to step down for a little bit, maybe have it there, walk backwards the wrong way, go in the wrong direction? How many wrong turns are we going to take? Hopefully the answer is 0. Again, in simple terms, in simplest form, we want to get to the kingdom in a straight line, having 0 deterrences. And when we start to deter, that's when we need to turn to God to help us, lead us back towards that right path. Because in such a complicated and complex world, we need to take a step back and remember why we are here. We're not here for ourselves. We are here to serve a purpose. And that purpose is to serve and praise God for his name's sake. And we do that in order so that we may be with him in the final days in the kingdom. I want to turn to one last passage, which should be pretty familiar, but it talks about exactly what we need to do in order to reach the end goals. It's Micah 6, verse 8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? There's 3 things. To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.